Sherlock Holmes and the Crimson Rose of Montague Street. Chapter 1. An ominous prelude. In the quiet and often shadowy streets of London, where the fog seems perpetually to lay its dense veil, there lies Montague Street, a place not unfamiliar with the usual stirrings of the city, yet sufficiently detached to afford some semblance of peace. It was upon a particularly bleak October evening that I found myself summoned, alongside my companion Sherlock Holmes, to this somewhat sombre locale. The urgency of the message brought to us by a flustered constable indicated a matter of considerable distress. A gentleman discovered lifeless in his study, a scene poised eerily calm, save for the peculiar presence of a single blood-red rose clutched in the deceased's cold hand. Upon our arrival, the scene that greeted us was as described in hurried whispers by the constable. The study was a small, well-appointed room lined with books, its heavy curtains drawn tightly against the biting chill that even now seeped through the cracks of the aging wood. A fire smouldered dully in the hearth, casting eerie shadows upon the furnishings and the figure that lay slumped over a desk cluttered with papers and oddments. The victim, a man of some 60 years as I ascertained, appeared to have succumbed suddenly. His features bore the placidity of one who had passed, in the absence of struggle or discomfort. The rose, stark and somewhat incongruous in the setting, seemed to draw the eye insistently, a silent witness to the final moments of the man's life. Holmes, with his customary swiftness, knelt beside the body, his keen eyes scanning the tableau before him. "This rose, Watson," he remarked, his voice low yet tinged with a peculiar intensity, "is decidedly out of place in this grim affair. Observe the way it has been held, almost reverently, in his hand. This was no mere happenstance. Our killer meant for us to find it thus." The constable, a stout fellow by the name of Lestrade, whom we had encountered on many such occasions, nodded in agreement, his face etched with concern. "No sign of forced entry, Mr. Holmes, and nothing else in the room has been disturbed. It's almost as though he simply sat down and, well, died. But people do not simply sit down and die holding a carefully positioned rose, Lestrade," Holmes replied curtly, his attention now fixed on the papers strewn across the desk. With a meticulous hand, he sifted through the documents, his brow furrowing as he absorbed their contents. "Business correspondence mostly," he mused aloud, "letters of agreement, contracts, and so forth. Ah, but here is something of interest." He held up a small, crumpled note, which upon closer inspection appeared to be a hastily written warning. "Cease your inquiries or prepare to face the consequences." "A threat," I observed, stepping closer to examine the note over his shoulder. "Indeed, Watson. And given the nature of our unfortunate host's demise, not an idle one, it seems." Holmes carefully placed the note into his pocket. "We shall have to look more closely into Mr. Pemberton's affairs. It is evident that his business dealings may have stirred a nest of vipers." As Holmes resumed his examination of the room, I took a moment to observe our surroundings more closely. The study was a testament to the man who had occupied it, a scholar perhaps, or at least an individual of some intellectual pursuit, given the array of books and artifacts that adorned the space. Yet now it served as a silent crypt, holding secrets that only Holmes's discerning eye might unveil. With a sudden gesture, Holmes beckoned me over to the window. "Look here, Watson, at the latch. What do you make of it?" I examined the indicated area and noted nothing particularly out of order. "It seems secure, Holmes." "Exactly," he replied, his eyes gleaming with a hint of triumph. "Secure from the inside, our killer did not enter through this window. No, he or she was either admitted by the victim or had another means of access to the room. This was no random act of violence. It was calculated and the rose is a key to understanding the killer's motive. As the night deepened, casting a further chill into the bones of all present, Holmes stood motionless, lost in thought. The constable and I exchanged glances, neither daring to disturb his contemplation. After a long pause, Holmes finally spoke, his voice resolute. "We must delve deeper into Mr. Pemberton's life, Watson. There are depths here not yet fathomed, and I suspect that the rose, this seemingly innocent emblem of beauty, may well prove to be a symbol of something far more sinister." With these words hanging in the air like a somber prophecy, we prepared to leave the quiet of the study, stepping back into the bustle of London streets, where the mysteries of the night awaited the keen edge of Holmes's deductive prowess. As we made our way out, the image of the rose, so vivid and red against the pallor of death, lingered in my mind, a crimson mystery that was only the beginning of what promised to be a most intriguing case. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Shadows. The morrow brought with it a drab sky, laden with the threat of rain, as Holmes and I made our way to the home of the late Mr. Pemberton's closest associate, Sir Charles Latimer. If one were to divine any hidden truths behind the ghastly occurrences, it was imperative to explore the social entanglements of the deceased. Sir Charles, a man of considerable influence and reputed business acumen, resided in an imposing mansion on the outskirts of Kensington, a dwelling that seemed to whisper secrets through its grandiose Victorian architecture. Upon our arrival, we were ushered into a lavishly decorated drawing room where Sir Charles awaited us, his countenance betraying a mixture of curiosity and distress. His greeting was both cordial and tinged with the reserve characteristic of a man burdened by affairs of considerable gravity. "Sherlock Holmes, I presume?" Sir Charles began, extending a hand which Holmes shook with polite formality. "I must confess your presence here brings both comfort and a certain dread. To what do I owe the honor, though I suspect it pertains to poor Pemberton's untimely demise?" "Indeed, Sir Charles, you surmise correctly," Holmes replied, his keen eyes swiftly taking in every nuance of the room and its occupant. "I am here to ascertain the circumstances leading up to our mutual acquaintance's death. I understand you were closely connected in business as well as personal matters?" "That is so," Sir Charles acknowledged, motioning for us to take our seats. "Pemberton and I were associates for many years, engaged in numerous ventures together. His loss is both a personal grief and a professional setback." Holmes nodded, his expression impassive, yet thoughtful. "Were you aware, Sir Charles, of any threats made against him, perhaps related to these joint ventures?" A shadow crossed Sir Charles's features, and he hesitated before responding. "It is no secret that Pemberton's dealings were not always, shall we say, universally well received. He had a penchant for pushing boundaries, and not all were pleased with his methods or outcomes." As Holmes pressed further on the nature of these business dealings, I took the opportunity to study our host. Sir Charles was a man of evident breeding, yet there was a hardness in his eyes that suggested a will accustomed to being challenged yet seldom defeated. His answers were measured, revealing little but hinting at layers of complexity beneath the surface. The interview was interrupted by the arrival of tea served by a discreet butler who moved through the room like a silent wraith. Holmes, however, barely acknowledged the service, his mind clearly preoccupied with the puzzle at hand. "Tell me, Sir Charles," Holmes resumed as the butler withdrew, "was there any recent occasion where Mr. Pemberton's actions might have provoked a more dangerous response? Any specific disputes that come to mind?" "There was one matter," Sir Charles admitted reluctantly, after a pause laden with deliberation. "A venture involving a tract of land in the East End, ripe for development, but entangled in legal disputes with the local populace. Pemberton was adamant about pushing forward despite opposition from several influential parties. Holmes's eyes glittered with interest. Might any of these parties have reason to wish harm upon Pemberton? It is possible, Sir Charles conceded, though I dare not name names without concrete evidence. You understand, of course, the delicacy of such accusations. Indeed I do, Holmes replied, his tone dry. And what of the rose, Sir Charles? Does this symbol mean anything to you? At this, Sir Charles looked genuinely perplexed. A rose! I can't say it holds any particular significance that I am aware of. Pemberton was fond of gardening, perhaps, but nothing more than that. Our discussion was soon drawn to a close, with Holmes expressing his gratitude for Sir Charles's cooperation. As we departed, Holmes's mood was contemplative, his mind clearly churning through the information gleaned from our conversation. As we stepped out into the chill of the impending afternoon, Holmes suddenly halted, his gaze fixed upon a small flower bed that lay beneath one of the mansion's ornate windows. There, amidst the seasonal blooms, were several rose bushes, their petals as red as the one found in Mr. Pemberton's hand. A coincidence, perhaps, Watson? Holmes mused aloud, or a symbol more intricately woven into this mystery than we might have supposed. The remainder of the day was spent in further inquiries among other acquaintances and business contacts of Mr. Pemberton, each conversation shedding a sliver of light on the complex web of his associations. Yet, as evening approached and we made our way back to Baker Street, the true motive and the identity of the perpetrator remained as elusive as ever. In the quiet of our lodgings, Holmes remained unusually silent, lost in thought. It was evident that the case presented complexities that even his formidable powers of deduction found challenging. Yet I knew better than to disturb him during these meditations, for it was often in such moments that the seeds of understanding began to take root, eventually flowering into the brilliant clarity of his conclusions. As for myself, I could not shake the image of that single crimson rose, so innocuous and yet so laden with meaning, a stark emblem of the mystery that lay before us, waiting to be unraveled by the keen intellect of Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 3. The Sanguine Study. A week had passed since our visit to Sir Charles Latimer, and the spectre of the crimson rose continued to haunt our inquiries. Despite Holmes's meticulous piecing together of facts and fancies alike, the truth seemed as shrouded in mystery as the fog that often enveloped the streets of London. It was with a somewhat heavy heart that I found myself once again by Holmes's side, summoned to the scene of yet another grim discovery. This time, the venue was an affluent area of West London, in a house owned by Mr. Jasper Moran, who had been found dead under circumstances disturbingly familiar to those of Mr. Pemberton. Upon our arrival, we were greeted by Inspector Lestrade, who looked more harried than usual. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said with a nod. "I'm afraid we have a similar case on our hands. Another gentleman found dead, and yes, with a rose in his grasp." Holmes wasted no time and proceeded directly to the study, where Mr. Moran's body was found. The room was locked from the inside, much to the bafflement of the local constabulary. Holmes, however, approached the matter with his usual brisk efficiency. The body of Mr. Moran was slumped over a desk, very much like Mr. Pemberton had been. In his hand was clutched a single scarlet rose, its petals vibrant against the pallor of death. "Notice, Watson, the position of the rose," Holmes said as he carefully examined the corpse. "Just as in Pemberton's case, it has been placed with deliberate care. This is no random token left behind. It is a message, a signature." Holmes then turned his attention to the room. It was a well-appointed study, much like the last, filled with books, papers, and various artifacts of a scholarly or artistic nature. He moved with quiet precision, examining every inch of the space, his eyes sharp and calculating. After a thorough search, Holmes directed his attention to the window, which was locked from the inside. "Another locked room mystery, it seems," he mused. But as we have learned, such obstacles are merely illusions meant to deter lesser minds. With a few deft movements, Holmes examined the lock and then the frame of the window. "Ah, here we have it," he exclaimed softly. He pointed out to me a nearly imperceptible set of scratches around the lock mechanism. "These are recent. Someone has tampered with this window to make it appear as though it was never opened." The rest of the afternoon was spent in methodical examination of Mr. Moran's personal and business papers. It became increasingly clear that he, like Mr. Pemberton, was involved in several business ventures, some of which were fraught with tension and controversy. Holmes gathered a small pile of letters and telegrams that hinted at financial disputes and threats of litigation. "It appears Mr. Moran was embroiled in a number of financial disagreements," Holmes remarked, as we sorted through the documents. "Note this telegram, Watson. It speaks of a meeting that was to take place the very evening of his death. It seems he was attempting to negotiate a settlement with a particularly aggressive creditor. As evening approached, Holmes decided it was time to take our leave. Before departing, however, he took a moment to speak privately with Inspector Lestrade. Though I was not privy to their conversation, I could see that Holmes was emphatic, his gestures sharp and decisive. On our way back to Baker Street, Holmes was unusually pensive, the cogs of his mind clearly turning over the facts of the case. Two men, both locked in their studies, both holding a rose and both involved in contentious financial dealings, he mused. "The pattern is clear, Watson, but the motive and the perpetrator remain elusive." The following day, Holmes received a visitor at our Baker Street residence, a Mr. Reginald Scott, a solicitor, and an acquaintance of both the deceased. His demeanor was anxious, and he wasted no time in coming to the point. "Mr. Holmes, I've heard of your involvement in the Moran and Pemberton cases," he began, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "I represent several clients who were financially entangled with both gentlemen. I fear that what has befallen them may not be an isolated incident." Holmes invited Mr. Scott to elaborate, which he did with an increasing sense of urgency. Both men were part of a consortium involved in a large development project in the East End. It's a lucrative deal, but it has been plagued by setbacks and disputes. There are rumors of sabotage and threats among the partners. "Indeed," Holmes replied, his interest visibly piqued. "And do you believe that these disputes are connected to their deaths?" "It's the only link I can see," Mr. Scott confessed. "The project has attracted a lot of attention, not all of it favorable. Some of the partners have received threats, anonymous, of course." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Mr. Scott. Your information may prove invaluable." As our visitor departed, Holmes turned to me with a resolute expression. "Watson, it seems we are looking not merely at isolated crimes, but perhaps at a conspiracy rooted deep within the heart of London's financial district." The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, yet the image they formed was complex and shadowy. Who could be orchestrating such a calculated series of events? And to what end? These questions plagued my thoughts as I watched Holmes, his silhouette framed against the window, gazing out at the bustling street below, his mind no doubt racing through the myriad possibilities. As night fell over London, the case of the Scarlet Roses continued to unfold, with Holmes at its center, a steadfast beacon in the enveloping darkness. The city's heart beat with a rhythm of secrets and lies, but I had every faith that Holmes's brilliant mind would pierce the veil of mystery that surrounded these chilling events. Chapter 4. The Lady with the Fan. In the wake of our visit with Mr. Reginald Scott, Holmes's determination to unravel the tangled skein of our current mystery seemed only to intensify. It was with this resolute purpose that we found ourselves, some days later, preparing to attend a charity event hosted by none other than Lady Eastwick, a noted philanthropist whose name had surfaced during our inquiries, not as a suspect, but as a person of interest due to her social and financial connections to several key figures in our investigation. Lady Eastwick's estate, situated on the expansive grounds of a grand London suburb, was a marvel of Victorian architecture, its spires and gables casting long shadows as the sun dipped below the horizon. The occasion was to be a gala intended to raise funds for the rebuilding of a local hospital, and as such attracted a diverse array of London's elite, from nobility to successful merchants. Upon our arrival, we were greeted by the sight of finely dressed gentlemen and elegantly attired ladies, their conversations a light murmur beneath the orchestral quartet that played in the background. Lady Eastwick herself stood near the entrance, her figure of grace and beauty, her dark hair elegantly coiffed, her dress a shimmering fabric that caught the light with every movement. She held a delicate fan, which she fluttered with an almost theatrical flair, her manner both inviting and imperious. Holmes, ever observant, whispered to me as we approached, "Observe her carefully, Watson. The art of social navigation she practices is not merely a function of her status, but a barometer of her influence." Lady Eastwick welcomed us with a smile, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, what an honor it is to have you both here this evening. I trust the night finds you well." "Quite well, thank you, Lady Eastwick," Holmes replied, his voice smooth and polite. "Your efforts tonight are most commendable. It is always a pleasure to see such dedication to a noble cause." "You are too kind, Mr. Holmes." Lady Eastwick's reply was gracious, yet there was a precision in her tone that suggested a mind accustomed to weighing every word. "Please, enjoy the festivities. I trust they will provide some measure of diversion from the graver matters that occupy your days." As she turned to greet other arriving guests, Holmes leaned close and murmured, "A skilled conversationalist, Watson. She deflects as deftly as she engages." We mingled among the guests, Holmes occasionally pausing to observe not just the interactions but the subtler exchanges, the glances, the gestures, the nuances of body language that betray more than words might convey. It was during one such observation that Holmes suddenly tensed, his attention captured by a brief but evidently significant interaction between Lady Eastwick and a rather stern-looking gentleman. "Did you see that, Watson?" Holmes asked, his eyes narrowed in thought. "I'm afraid I missed it, Holmes," I admitted. "Lady Eastwick just passed a note to that gentleman. It was subtle, expertly done, but unmistakable in its intention. We must find out who he is," Holmes stated, his mind already racing ahead to the implications of what he had seen. The evening wore on, and we took the opportunity to engage in conversations with several guests, some of whom shared insights into Lady Eastwick's activities and associations that proved enlightening. It was during one such conversation that we learned of her recent endeavors to expand her influence into the city's political circles, her charitable work serving as both cover and catalyst for deeper engagements. Holmes was particularly interested in a comment made by one of the guests, a Mr. Harold Greaves, who noted, "Lady Eastwick has been quite active in the East End, a place in need, but also a place ripe for certain types of investments. She has a keen eye for opportunity, that one." "Indeed," Holmes replied thoughtfully. "It is often said that charity and profit need not be mutually exclusive, but the manner of their conjunction can sometimes reveal much about the character of their practitioner." As the evening drew to a close, Holmes and I found ourselves once again in Lady Eastwick's company. Holmes, with a tact that matched the lady's own, broached the topic of her interests in the East End. "Lady Eastwick, your endeavors in the East End have not gone unnoticed," Holmes began. "Such efforts to uplift the impoverished are commendable. I am curious, though, about the challenges such work must surely present." Lady Eastwick's expression remained composed, but there was a flicker, perhaps of surprise or caution in her eyes. "Mr. Holmes, you are correct that the work is not without its challenges. The area is complicated, entangled in a myriad of social and economic issues, but one does what one can to bring light to the shadows." "A noble endeavor indeed," Holmes agreed, "and fraught with obstacles, I imagine, especially for those who might view such changes as contrary to their interests." "Quite so," she replied, her fan pausing momentarily. "One finds adversaries in the most unexpected places, Mr. Holmes, but perseverance is a virtue I value highly." As we took our leave, Holmes's expression was pensive, his mind clearly busy, piecing together the fragments of information we had gathered. In the carriage ride back to Baker Street, he was silent for a long time before finally speaking. "Watson, our evening has been most instructive. Lady Eastwick is far more than a mere socialite. She is a player in a game of high stakes. Her interests in the East End, her strategic philanthropy, her subtle exchange of notes, all these elements suggest a depth of involvement in our case that we cannot ignore." "The question then, Holmes," I ventured, "is whether her role is that of a benefactor or something altogether more complex?" "That, my dear Watson, is precisely what we must determine. But of one thing I am certain. The solution to our mystery lies not just in the identity of the killer, but in the web of influence and ambition that surrounds these tragic events. Thus, our investigation into the affairs of Lady Eastwick promised not only to delve into the murky depths of charity mingled with business, but to uncover the motives that drove a killer to leave the grim signature of a scarlet rose upon their victims. The game was afoot, and the stakes were higher than ever. Chapter 5: Echoes of the Past. Following our engagement at Lady Eastwick's gala, the riddle of the Crimson Rose had deepened, drawing us into a vortex of historical vendettas and modern-day machinations. It became imperative to untangle the threads of the past, for in the weave of history often lay the motives of the present. Upon returning to Baker Street, Holmes immersed himself in a detailed examination of the deceased gentleman's backgrounds. As he pored over the military records, letters, and personal diaries procured with some difficulty, his face occasionally illuminated by the flicker of candlelight, a picture slowly began to emerge, one that bespoke of dark days and even darker deeds. Both Mr. Pemberton and Mr. Moran had served in the Crimean War, a fact known but not considered pertinent until now. However, as Holmes discovered, they had been more than mere soldiers. They had been part of a secretive detachment involved in covert operations, the nature of which was shadowed in ambiguity and moral dubiety. "One must delve into the murkier waters of history to catch the larger fish, Watson," Holmes remarked, as he laid out several faded military dispatches across the table. These men were not merely comrades in arms, they shared secrets that, if exposed, could be ruinous. Indeed, the documents spoke of a particular mission, a clandestine affair that had ended in disaster. A village, caught between warring factions, had been razed, its inhabitants casualties of a brutal and unseen war. The responsibility for this act was ambiguously attributed to the detachment to which Pemberton and Moran belonged. "It appears, Watson, that our victims were linked by more than just business interests or social acquaintances," Holmes mused, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "They shared a past steeped in blood, a past that someone is keen to keep buried." Determined to explore this avenue further, Holmes decided we should visit the sole surviving member of that fateful mission, a certain Colonel Bartholomew Smythe, who had since retired to a quiet life in the countryside of Surrey. According to Holmes's deductions, the colonel might either be a target or perhaps hold the key to unraveling the motive behind the murders. Our journey to Surrey was undertaken under a sky heavy with the promise of rain. Arriving at the Colonel's residence, a modest manor house shrouded in ivy, we were greeted by the man himself. A tall figure, stooped with age, but sharp of eye. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he greeted, his voice tinged with the weariness of one who had seen too much. "To what do I owe the pleasure, though I suspect it has more to do with the ghosts of the past than the pleasantries of the present?" "Quite astute, Colonel," Holmes replied as we were ushered into a study that smelled of tobacco and leather. "We are here on a matter concerning your former comrades, Mr. Pemberton and Mr. Moran. It seems their past has caught up with them in the most fatal manner." The Colonel's countenance grew somber, his eyes clouding over with memories best forgotten. "I had feared as much," he confessed, settling into his armchair with a sigh. "The mission you speak of was cursed from the start. We were young, zealous, and terribly naive about the horrors of war." Holmes listened intently as Colonel Smythe recounted the events of the mission, his narrative filled with the regret and sorrow of a man burdened by decades of guilt. The village was supposed to be a strategic stronghold, but intelligence was faulty. When we realized our error, it was too late. The consequences were devastating. And now it appears that someone is exacting retribution for those long-ago sins, Holmes deduced. "Your comrades have been murdered, each with a rose left upon their person, a symbol, I believe, of retribution." Colonel Smythe nodded gravely. "I have received veiled threats myself, warnings from shadows. I had hoped they were just the rantings of a troubled soul, but now we must consider you may be in grave danger as well," Holmes concluded, his expression stern with resolve. "Colonel, I implore you to take every precaution. My associate and I will do all within our power to uncover the assailant and bring this dark chapter to a close." Before departing, Holmes inspected the Colonel's security arrangements and made several recommendations for enhancing his safety. The ride back to London was a quiet one, with each of us lost in our thoughts, pondering the depths to which men might sink in the pursuit of vengeance. Upon our return to Baker Street, Holmes retreated into his chemical experiments, a sign I had come to recognize as indicative of his deep cogitation. Late into the night I heard him pacing, the occasional murmur of thought reaching me through the stillness of our quarters. The following morning brought with it a breakthrough. Holmes burst into the breakfast room, his eyes alight with the fire of discovery. "Watson, I have it," he exclaimed, brandishing a telegram. "The rose! Its significance has been staring us in the face all along. Recall Lady Eastwick's charity for orphan children, many of whom were displaced by wars, including the Crimean conflict. Could it be that our murderer is linked to those very orphans?" The implications were staggering, and as I processed Holmes's words, the pieces of the puzzle began to align with chilling precision. "Holmes, you mean to say the killer might be seeking justice for the lives lost, lives that were torn asunder by the actions of Pemberton and Moran?" "Exactly, Watson," Holmes replied, his voice taut with the excitement of the chase. "And I suspect the answer to who is behind this lies somewhere within the list of those orphans. We must delve into this further and quickly." Thus, armed with new purpose, we set about unraveling this latest thread, each of us aware that with each passing moment, the danger to Colonel Smythe and perhaps others connected to that fateful mission grew ever more imminent. The shadows of the past were long, and they reached far into the heart of present sorrows, a dark echo that threatened to repeat its mournful refrain. Chapter 6. The Forgotten Soldier. Our investigations had led us into the depths of the past, revealing connections steeped in the shadows of war and retribution. Holmes's revelation that the orphaned offspring of the Crimean conflict might hold the key to our series of morbid affairs, set us on a new path of inquiry. The task at hand was daunting, for the records of those times were often incomplete or lost altogether. Nevertheless, Holmes approached the challenge with characteristic vigor, employing his unique methods to unearth what many would deem irretrievable. It is often the case, Watson, that what is thought lost merely requires a more determined seeker, Holmes remarked one morning, as we sat amidst a sea of papers and ledgers in our sitting room at Baker Street. He had secured these documents from various sources: military archives, church records, and private collections, scouring them for any trace of the children rendered parentless by the war. As Holmes delved into the records with an almost surgical precision, I occupied myself with reading through the personal correspondences of both Pemberton and Moran, hoping to find any reference to the orphans or any peculiar interest in charitable works that might connect them to the Lady Eastwick's endeavors. It was during this meticulous examination that a small, faded photograph slipped from between the pages of a letter, a photograph depicting a younger Pemberton and Moran, in military attire, standing alongside a third figure, a fellow officer perhaps, who bore a striking resemblance to Lady Eastwick. "Look at this, Holmes," I called out, handing him the photograph. Holmes took it, holding it up to the light, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized the image. "Indeed, Watson, this third figure could well be a sibling or close relation to our Lady Eastwick. This warrants further investigation. It could explain her vested interest in the welfare of the orphans and perhaps her connection to our victims," Holmes mused, placing the photograph on the mantelpiece as if to keep it within easy reach for further contemplation. Armed with this new information, Holmes decided it was time to confront Lady Eastwick directly, albeit with the subtlety and tact that the situation demanded. We thus made arrangements to visit her under the pretense of discussing her charitable organization, specifically her work with the orphans of the Crimean War. Lady Eastwick received us at her estate with her usual grace and composure, her eyes revealing nothing of her thoughts. As we were seated in her opulently appointed drawing room, Holmes began to steer the conversation towards her philanthropic interests. "Lady Eastwick, your dedication to the cause of these unfortunate orphans is indeed commendable. I am particularly interested in how you came to be involved with them. Is there a personal connection that motivates your generosity?" Holmes inquired, watching her closely. A flicker of emotion, quickly masked, passed over Lady Eastwick's features. "Mr. Holmes, when one has been fortunate in life, it is only right to give back to those less so. The plight of those children left alone in the world by the ravages of war touched my heart. There is no personal connection, merely a deep sympathy for their suffering." Holmes nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer, but I could tell he was subtly probing for inconsistencies or tells. And yet such sympathy often springs from personal experience. It is rare to find someone so moved without a deeper, more personal impetus. Lady Eastwick hesitated, then sighed softly, a note of resignation in her voice. "You are very perceptive, Mr. Holmes. I had a brother, lost to the war. He was not unlike those children, left to fend for himself in a world that can be cruel and unforgiving. It is in his memory that I act." Holmes's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase as he gently pressed on. "Might this brother have served with Mr. Pemberton and Mr. Moran, by any chance?" Lady Eastwick's composure slipped for but a moment, a crack in the veneer that Holmes was quick to note. "Yes, he did, and it was his death that they too mourned. We were all victims of that dreadful conflict, in one way or another." Sensing the delicate nature of her admission, Holmes tactfully changed the course of our conversation, expressing his condolences and admiration for her strength in transforming personal grief into a force for good. Yet as we took our leave, Holmes whispered to me, Watson, we are close to the heart of the matter now. Her brother's death is the key to understanding her motives, whether they be for good or ill. Our next step was to trace the identity of Lady Eastwick's brother, a task that proved less challenging than anticipated due to Holmes's extensive network of informants and associates. Within a day, we had confirmed that her brother, Captain Michael Eastwick, had indeed served with Pemberton and Moran, and further, that he had been reported missing after the same tragic incident that had scarred them all. "The plot thickens, Watson," Holmes declared as we discussed our findings in our study. Lady Eastwick's involvement in the charity, her reactions to our questions, and now her brother's direct connection to our victims, all these elements are converging towards a singular, possibly sinister, conclusion. With this revelation, Holmes and I prepared ourselves for the next phase of our investigation, aware that each step brought us closer not only to the truth, but to the potential unraveling of a woman's life defined by loss and shadowed by revenge. The stakes were higher than ever, as we ventured deeper into the labyrinth of past grievances and present deceptions, each more entangled than the last. Chapter 7. The Veil Lifts. As the relentless wheels of investigation turned, Holmes and I found ourselves navigating an increasingly complex labyrinth of deception, sorrow, and vengeance. Each revelation seemed only to deepen the enigma, drawing us closer to a denouement that promised to be as tragic as it was illuminating. Upon confirming Lady Eastwick's brother as Captain Michael Eastwick, who had served and presumably perished alongside Mr. Pemberton and Mr. Moran, Holmes became increasingly contemplative. The tangled skein of their shared history was undoubtedly the loom upon which this current tapestry of tragedy was being woven. "Lady Eastwick has not been entirely forthcoming with us, Watson," Holmes remarked one morning as we sat in our study, surrounded by the detritus of our relentless inquiry. While her philanthropic gestures toward the war orphans may indeed be genuine, they also serve to mask a deeper, more personal vendetta. We must tread carefully, for we are dealing with a woman who has harbored a grievance for decades, and it seems likely that her sense of justice has been skewed by the loss of her only brother. It was decided, therefore, that we would revisit Lady Eastwick this time to confront her more directly with our findings, yet with the delicacy the situation demanded given her profound loss. Before undertaking this delicate mission, Holmes spent several hours in deep contemplation, often pacing the length of our study or staring moodily into the fire. The following afternoon, under a sky heavy with the promise of rain, we made our way once more to Lady Eastwick's estate. The lady received us in her usual manner, composed and gracious, yet with a trace of wariness that had not been evident in our previous encounters. "Lady Eastwick," Holmes began, once the initial pleasantries were dispensed with, "when we last spoke you mentioned your brother, Captain Michael Eastwick. It appears he was quite close to both Mr. Pemberton and Mr. Moran. Indeed, their fates were tragically intertwined." Lady Eastwick's face remained impassive, but her hands, resting in her lap, clenched slightly, a small, involuntary betrayal of her inner turmoil. "Yes, Mr. Holmes, they served together and they suffered together. The war spared few, and those it did not claim outright, it marked forever." "Indeed, madam," Holmes replied softly. "War leaves scars on the soul as well as on the land. However, it has come to our attention that the manner of your brother's death may not have been as was reported. It seems he may have been involved in a covert operation, one that went grievously awry, resulting in the civilian casualties we have recently discussed." Lady Eastwick's composure faltered, her gaze dropping momentarily before meeting Holmes's eyes with a renewed intensity. "What are you implying, Mr. Holmes?" "Simply that there is more to your brother's story, and to the deaths of Mr. Pemberton and Mr. Moran, than has been acknowledged. We believe that the tragedies of the past have extended their shadows into the present, manifesting in these recent killings. For a long moment, Lady Eastwick was silent, her expression one of internal conflict. Then, with a visible effort, she composed herself and spoke. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I will not pretend ignorance of your implications. Yes, I have sought to understand the full circumstances of my brother's death to seek some measure of justice for what occurred, but I assure you I am not responsible for harming anyone." Holmes nodded, his expression one of sympathy mixed with relentless pursuit of truth. "Lady Eastwick, we do not doubt your grief or your desire for justice. However, we must consider all possibilities. The deaths of Pemberton and Moran, marked by the symbol of the rose, suggest a vendetta. It is imperative we understand all connections fully." The conversation that followed was difficult and fraught with emotion. Lady Eastwick recounted her years of searching for the truth about her brother's fate, her gradual discovery of the covert operation gone wrong, and her confrontation with both Pemberton and Moran, who had, at different times, confirmed the tragedy, but denied any wrongdoing. "My brother was the scapegoat for their mistakes," she declared, her voice trembling with suppressed anger and sorrow. "They lived prosperous lives while I grappled with the loss. The roses, they were a symbol of remembrance, not vengeance." Holmes listened intently, his face inscrutable. When she had finished, he spoke gently, but with an underlying firmness. "Lady Eastwick, your story touches upon the deepest chords of human suffering and the desire for rectitude. However, the law must uphold justice without personal bias. We must continue to investigate and ensure that no more lives are lost in this quest for the truth." As we took our leave, the skies opened, a torrential rain mirroring the tumultuous revelations of the day. Holmes was pensive on the journey back, his mind undoubtedly weaving together the threads of the narrative Lady Eastwick had provided with the evidence at hand. "Whatever the truth, Watson," he said, as we neared Baker Street, "this case illustrates the profound complexities of human emotions and the dire consequences when they are left unchecked. We must tread carefully, for while justice must be served, it should not be at the cost of further tragedy." Thus, as the city around us was washed by the cleansing rain, our resolve was hardened. We would uncover the full extent of this tangled web, bringing clarity and resolution to those haunted by the ghosts of their pasts. Our pursuit of justice, though fraught with moral and ethical shadows, would continue with unrelenting determination, guided by Holmes's brilliant, deductive reasoning and a steadfast commitment to the principles of right and law. Chapter 8. A Rose by Any Other Name. The resolution of a case, as my companion Sherlock Holmes often remarked, lies not merely in the unveiling of facts, but in the alignment of those facts with the human elements of motive, opportunity, and means. As we sat in our familiar surroundings at 221B Baker Street, the pieces of the puzzle regarding the deaths associated with the Crimson Rose were gradually falling into place, each revealing the tragic tapestry of human emotion and vendetta woven through our investigation. Holmes had spent several hours in deep contemplation, his long fingers steepled against his lips, his eyes occasionally flicking to the fire, as if in search of an elusive truth hidden within its embers. Finally, he rose from his armchair with the air of a man who has reached a decisive conclusion. "Watson," he began, his tone carrying the weight of impending resolution, "our visit to Lady Eastwick has shed light upon the dark corners of this case. We are now tasked with assembling this information in such a way as to reveal the true architect of these tragic events." I nodded, my role as his chronicler never more vital than in these moments of revelation. "Do you suspect, then, that Lady Eastwick herself has engineered these events, as a form of retribution for her brother's death? Holmes walked to the window, peering out at the bustling London street below, before replying, "It is not merely suspicion, Watson, but deduction, formed by the alignment of motive with opportunity. Lady Eastwick, driven by a deep-seated need for justice, or what she perceives as justice, has indeed orchestrated the demise of those she holds responsible for her brother's untimely death. However, the question of legality and moral justification is what complicates our conclusions." "Then we must proceed with care," I remarked, fully aware of the implications of accusing a woman of high social standing and noble intentions, albeit misguided, of such grave actions. "Exactly, Watson, and proceed we shall directly to the source," Holmes declared, donning his coat and hat with brisk efficiency. "We shall confront Lady Eastwick with our findings, not merely to accuse, but to offer her a chance for confession and perhaps some semblance of redemption." The journey to Lady Eastwick's estate was undertaken under an overcast sky, as if the heavens themselves bore the burden of our somber task. Upon arriving, we were shown into her study, where she awaited us with a composed, if somewhat resigned expression. "Lady Eastwick," Holmes began without preamble, "we have come to discuss the tragic event that have unfolded. We know of your deep loss and the sorrow that has driven you to seek retribution against those you hold responsible for your brother's death." Lady Eastwick met Holmes's gaze steadily, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Mr. Holmes, I have anticipated your return. I presume you have pieced together the fragments of this sordid affair." Holmes nodded, his demeanor one of professional detachment. "Indeed, we have. You have orchestrated the deaths of Mr. Pemberton and Mr. Moran by employing means that ensured they were found with a symbol, the rose, that clearly means much to you. A symbol of love turned into one of vengeance." The lady sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly as if relieved of a great weight. "Yes, Mr. Holmes, the rose was to be a reminder of what they had done, of the life they tore asunder. My actions were for Michael, for all that he suffered." "And yet, Lady Eastwick," Holmes continued, his voice softer yet imbued with firmness, "justice sought through unlawful means is no justice at all. It is vengeance, and it consumes all it touches, leaving only more grief in its wake." There was a long silence, filled only by the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel. Then Lady Eastwick looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She rose slowly and crossed the room to her desk, where a single rose lay beside an envelope. She picked up the letter and held it aloft, her voice trembling with emotion. "This letter is my confession. It contains the full account of my actions and the reasons behind them," she said, her tone resolute. "In it, you will find my truth, the grief and fury that led me down this path." Before Holmes could speak, Lady Eastwick opened the envelope, her trembling hands breaking the wax seal. She inhaled deeply as she unfolded the paper, a sharp, chemical scent filling the air. Her face contorted instantly in shock and pain, and she staggered backward, the letter falling from her grasp. Within moments, she collapsed to the floor, lifeless. The room fell into stunned silence. I instinctively rushed to her side, my hands trembling as I sought a pulse, yet the ashen pallor of her face told me what I already dreaded. "She's gone, Holmes," I murmured, my voice thick with sorrow. "Whatever was in that letter?" Holmes, ever methodical, interrupted, his voice calm but edged with grim understanding. He carefully retrieved the fallen letter, his handkerchief shielding his fingers. "A clever ploy, Watson. The letter was laced with a toxic chemical, likely cyanide or something similar. A single inhalation would suffice to end her life, a tragic symmetry, as she claimed." I rose slowly. the weight of her final act pressing upon me as Holmes's words settled in the air. Holmes carefully unfolded the letter and began to read its contents aloud. The confession was as tragic as it was harrowing, detailing her brother's accidental death in a crossfire caused by Pemberton and Moran. She wrote of her anger, her despair, and her belief that they had failed in their duty to protect him, leaving her bereft of the only family she had. I could not forgive them, the letter concluded. I could not bear their freedom while my brother lay forgotten, but in seeking vengeance, I have made myself a monster. I have chosen to end my life as I ended theirs, for I am unworthy of absolution. When Holmes finished, the letter trembled slightly in his hands, though his expression remained composed. He placed it carefully on the desk beside the rose and turned to Watson, his voice quiet yet resolute. "We return to Baker Street, Watson. There is nothing more for us to do here." The ride back was somber, the weight of the case pressing upon us both. When we arrived home, Holmes sank into his armchair by the fire, his gaze fixed on the flames as he lit his pipe. After a long silence, he spoke. "This case, Watson, has been one of the more piteous we have encountered. It reminds us that the human heart is a fragile vessel holding both great love and deep sorrow." I nodded, the words resonating deeply as I sat opposite him, reflecting on the tragedy that had unfolded. In the quiet of Baker Street, the case of the Crimson Rose had reached its final chapter, its story etched forever in my memory as one of grief, vengeance, and the fragile nature of the human soul. The days after Lady Eastwick's death weighed heavily on me. Her confession, driven by love and grief, left a profound sadness that was difficult to shake. The case had revealed the fragility of the human heart and the devastating lengths to which sorrow could drive a person. As I sat in the quiet of Baker Street, Holmes spoke, his voice breaking the stillness. "Do not dwell too long on this, Watson. The world holds countless enigmas, and we must be ready for the next." I nodded, his words a reminder of life's unending rhythm. Though burdened by the past, I took solace in knowing the future awaited with new challenges, mysteries, and the enduring pursuit of truth. And so we waited, the glow of the fire warming the room, for the next knock at the door to usher in another curious case.